For all of us everyone joining us, my name is Cody Voorhees. I'm the Vice President at Product School. And we're here today with John Cutler, the Head of Product Research at Amplitude. Really excited to spend the next 30 minutes with him, just getting to understand what he does, what his role does, how Amplitude works in the marketplace, and just any opportunities or any questions he has that may be interesting from our users here, from our viewers. We'll then open up that at the end. But John, if you could just kick us off, I'd love to learn a little bit more about your personal story and how you got started.
Well, yeah, I took a bit of a circuitous route to product. I spent my 20s, I was heavily involved in music. So I did a lot of touring and playing and being in vans with stinky people, basically. And I also had a video game at the time. I tried to make this bartending game called Last Call. And you can still find videos of it on YouTube, which is pretty funny. It's not like a great game, but it had its moments to do its thing. So yeah, I got kind of, I was doing that a lot in my 20s. And in the summers, I actually, when I wasn't on tour, I would go and either work at investment banks, as a PowerPoint operator. So I basically sit in front of PowerPoint for 12 hours and crank out road shows and basically M&A documents. So I learned basically a lot about business by sitting in banks. And sometimes I'd actually work at Nickelodeon and MTV doing presentations, which was also a kind of big learning experience, you know, watching the CEO of Nickelodeon present and working on producing those things. So I did a fair amount of that in my 20s, and I kind of got a late start and then slipped into different product roles, product management roles, analyst roles at startups in New York City when I was living there. And then that kind of progressed. And, the last maybe 5 to 7 years, it's gotten pretty serious, heavily involved in the community. So I worked at a great company here in Santa Barbara called AppFolio, and then Zendesk and Pendo, and now at Amplitude. So my background's in product management, I guess, UX research, but that's sort of how I got here. It is testament to that, you can be kind of a late bloomer in product. So if you're 23, don't think that your whole career is going to go downhill because you don't jump on that associate PM role that you see. There's lots of ways to get into this for sure.
And what drew you to Amplitude, just to follow up on that?
Well, she probably doesn't want me to say this, but Sandhya at Amplitude was very, very, very persistent about interesting me in the role. And so I started out at Amplitude as a product evangelist. But my mission wasn't really to talk about Amplitude a lot. I really like so the product is product intelligence. It's kind of a combination of data management and analytics and experience management. So, our goal is help teams be more impactful, basically. Now, I think what Sandhya realized is that overlapped a lot with what I write a lot about and what I've kind of been very passionate about, which is this idea of impactful product teams. And I, have some weird views of product management and collaboration and things, but I think it fit well with her mission. And so if you imagine, a lot of B2B SaaS products, especially ones I like to say with Amplitude, is that our goal is to help people get promotions, but no one's going to get fired if they stop using Amplitude. Yeah. And it's actually a really curious place to be as a B2B startup because, a lot of old school B2B products, someone gets fired if they stop using it. The customer and the user are different people, and the customer pays for it and the user better use it, otherwise you get fired. Now, Amplitude's different because our goal is to make these teams really, really, really effective, but no one's forcing them, and it's a lot of transition in the organization. So there's a lot of change management. I guess you could call it culture of product. There's a lot of stuff involved in making our customers successful. So I think Sandhya saw that, that we had a good overlap between what I talked about and then what Amplitude was doing. And since then, now I'm heading up our product education and what we call practice research or product research, which is a sort of research function. And that's super interesting because of pairing education, both education of our product, but also broader education in product management, and then pairing that with doing deeper research on how teams work, et cetera. So it's kind of a dream progression of roles, and never really had to sell Amplitude. I think it sells itself. I just get to kind of do what I like to do, and it's a good overlap with the company.
It's always the dream in product, right? To have that end
Yeah,
user.
it's funny you mentioned that, right? Because someone said that the other day. They're like, "Wow, that sounds like the perfect job." Every product manager deals of not having to, like, the thing just sells itself. So it's way, anyone who is in B2B SaaS knows that it's not that easy. But I like to actually think in B2B SaaS that the whole company is the product. Like our customer success folks are really, really good, and like our support team and the product. So it's really like a big team effort. The whole thing is the product, and I like that a lot.
And just for our community members here that might not be totally up to speed, could you give us a quick elevator pitch on what Amplitude is and what you do for your users?
Yeah, so what we call our product at Amplitude is product intelligence. And so product intelligence is the combination of kind of telemetry and data management. So getting data from your products, collecting it, making that data usable. And then our product's really, self-service product analytics that allows teams to be able to understand their customers better, their users better, and then make better decisions, which improves the experience, which then creates more data, which kind of flows back into things. So the best way to think of it is, if you've been involved in this business for a while, is like BI or business intelligence is often really about different sources of business data and getting it in one place, and then asking questions and answering that. And product data is pretty different actually from a lot of BI type data. Product data is very messy. It's behavioral data of customers using products. And so you really need like a specialized product to do that. The other thing in BI, it's traditionally like an analyst who takes questions and answers for the rest of the business. Whereas in product, you don't have time for that. You've got a team of people, a product manager, designer, engineers working together, and they don't have time to wait 3 weeks for someone to give them an answer. So they need a product that they can make sense of this complex data in the here and now, right now, so they can make decisions. So that's not a very good elevator pitch. I wouldn't recommend that anyone takes that elevator pitch, but that's my description of it.
Hey, we're not in front of the sales team here, so
yeah, exactly. They're not watching.
Hopefully. Yeah, great explanation, John. Hey, as product people, we always reinforce the idea of falling in love with the problem and not the solution. Yep. What are some of the problems that you're most passionate about?
Well, this is kind of what I spoke about. There's my day job and my personal passions. And I actually think there's a fair amount of overlap there with this. But maybe this goes back to my band days or playing music days. But I am obsessed with the problem of how to make these kind of quirky cross-functional teams work more effectively together, and then also have impact out in the world. I was speaking with someone the other day, and they said, well, the engineers on my team don't seem to care. They don't seem to care what it's doing. And that's just not my experience whatsoever. I think some people grow not to care in their company because no one has shared with them the insights or shared with them the why or shared with them the problem. But my experience in this business is that whether it's a designer, engineer, product manager, this is a group of people who's passionate about applying the skills that they have to create impact out in the world. So the number one problem that I focus on kind of personally is how to make those teams work more effectively. And I call it like the beautiful mess. I have this blog called The Beautiful Mess, and that's kind of what I'm passionate about. But I think the overlap there with Amplitude is that it's funny. I think it almost requires products like Amplitude and other types of products to be able to work that way, because you're the problem solvers. You're right there with the customer. You're right there with the product, and you have the domain knowledge necessary to make decisions. So the more data, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, I mean, I was a UX researcher too, so I very much believe in qualitative research as well. But whatever information or data you have or insights you have can make you more effective. So that's kind of my personal mission, but then it overlaps pretty neatly with Amplitude's mission as well.
Yeah, you love the data and love getting it organized. So
right.
Always great in product. I think we're getting into a lot of specifics here about what you as a product manager would be doing. So what would you say are some of the biggest myths and misconceptions that folks have about building digital products? And maybe specifically you can talk about something you do in Amplitude, or you can just give us a general.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple that I think are really interesting. Like, so one thing at Amplitude we see is, someone will have decided that they want their team to be more data driven. That there's like the hippo, the highest paid person's opinion, and they want to shut that person up, and they're going to get data, and then suddenly it's going to answer all their problems, and they're going to be able to, they're going to have perfect information. And one of the coolest things I think working at Amplitude, at least when we look at our customers that do make very, very effective use of quantitative data, is it's not like that at all. You don't just kind of, you don't just get the data and it answers all the problem. It actually requires more trust as a team. It requires more psychological safety as a team. It requires more questions. Like, you don't just find the insight and then that everyone decides what to do. You find the insight and realize, maybe we didn't see it the right way. Let's kind of look at it a different way, or let's explore the data a little bit more. So I think that one myth is this sort of myth of the data-driven team that doesn't need to trust each other, that doesn't need to do everything, that the data explains what you need to do and you just go for it. And that's one thing I really like in Amplitude is that, like I said, the customers, and I'd say we do this internally, that really embrace evidence and learning, have to be that much more collaborative and safe with how they work. So I'd say that that's one myth, but I could probably, there's many other myths that I think one thing, especially for more junior product managers or people getting into it, is they somehow they imagine that they're going to have a lot more control than they do. And it really is, it's kind of a paradox with product. The more passionate the designers and the more passionate the engineers you're working with, the less power you're going to have as a product manager. Right? And so you see these organizations that suddenly get product management going in their company, and they just need someone to tell anyone what to do. So at first, they look to the product manager for all the answers. And then as that organization develops and more people build their product shops, and designers are more empowered and engineers are more empowered, actually the reverse starts to happen, right? Like, you'll often be in situations as a product manager where you know the least out of anyone in the room, where you are kind of dwarfed by the expertise of the people in the room. So I think that, a lot of junior product managers, when they start out, or maybe at one company, they perceive that you're going to have a lot more control, or that your job is to write tickets for people or kind of tell people subtly what to do or do anything like that. And the reality is, especially as your team gets up leveled, is that there's less and less and less of that. There's more influence and leadership. So hopefully, I don't know, those are two myths that come to mind. I have a lot more, but that's on my mind lately.
I think those are great myths, John. I want to follow up on that. So you said, a lot of times you don't know the most in the room. You're looking to experts. You're looking to help guide and help lead based on the data and based on what other people know. Who are some of the people you might look to in a product organization for this expertise?
Well, I think that, the two that come to mind immediately are sort of your immediate team. You might have designers, you might have engineers or data scientists, but in any organization of any size, there's expertise in all sorts of pockets of the organization. There'll be pockets of expertise in marketing. There'll be pockets of expertise in sales. And I think that that's one of the most humbling moments in the beginning is realizing that part of your job is kind of accessing these areas of expertise and helping those people and drawing that information out. But I think, the immediate answer to your question is, when I started product management, often there would be no designer, or the designer would have been hired at some other time and maybe, work in another part of the organization, and you only have a little bit of their time. And I think one of the things, especially if you've been doing it for a while, for a lot of product managers, is realizing how little you know about design and how little you may have been forced to do it, and you may have reasonable chops, but it's not the same chops in many cases as a designer that's been really training for a decade to be able to do it. So that's maybe a very concrete example that you might join an organization and think, I don't know what this designer is doing. My advice is to spend a lot of time with the designer and sort of see what they know and understand their expertise, because they might be able to do things that you really don't know how to do.
Yeah, especially if you're a visual learner, if that's what resonates
Right.
most with you, I think that makes the most sense.
Yeah.
Great answer, John. What would you say are the most important skills that have helped you grow in your career so far?
Oof. I mean, I don't want to over-index on my journey. Okay, well, I could do with mine. I mean, I've benefited a lot, I think, by empathy. Maybe not is the right, I mean, empathy is a very overloaded word, but I found that you can gain a lot of trust and a lot of respect from engineers and designers when you really, 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 really listen to what they do. And you really try to understand their needs and how you can help them and fill their particular needs. So I think that's helped me in the sense that, often when I'm working on a team, I build very strong relationships with the engineers on the team and very strong relationships with the designers on the team. Like I know enough about their world to be able, I don't think that product managers need to be developers, for example, but I think hopefully you've walked a mile in their shoes. I mean, take a tutorial, put something out there in the world, ship something. It might be hard, but there's ways that you can learn how to do this, right? But just being able to know a little bit about their world, both for designers and engineers, go a long way. And I'll give you a really specific example. If you've ever tried to do any type of programming, and someone comes and taps your shoulder every 5 minutes or bugs you with certain types of meetings, you know that it's so hard to stay in the zone. And you also know, if you've done that sometimes you'll look at the computer screen for 6 hours and then type one key and solve the problem. And a lot of new product managers don't know that, and they're kind of nervous, oh, where you guys were going out to lunch, or I didn't see you on Slack, or they're all up in their head about whether anyone's working. And if you've built that connection with engineers, you know that style of working, A, you need to get out of the way, B, you need to be available when they have questions, and C, you can't apply what you think of busyness to their world, because sometimes their world is pondering something for 4 hours and then typing one key and fixes it. And so I see a lot of product managers come to me and say, I don't know if my team's working very hard. I don't know whether they're trying their hardest. I mean, really, we've got this deadline and we're doing this. And I encourage them to kind of get out of their own head and talk to the people on their team and see how their team thinks about work and being busy. But that's the first thing that came to mind from your question, but I'm happy to explore that more.
I like that. If I can tease out maybe some of my takeaways, but maybe they're my takeaways as a fellow people leader. You want to start with the why, and you want to be able to have at least walked a little bit in the people's shoes that you're working with.
Right.
I think those are really, really good.
And build a connection with their style of working and listen. I mean, another very clear example is a lot of designers. It's very important for them to get out of the building and do some research and hear firsthand something. And so if you don't know that, as a product manager, you'll say, well, I was talking to this customer about X, Y, and Z. And if you've not walked in the shoes of a designer, you realize that you really should have invited them to that meeting.
Yeah.
Nothing replaces firsthand connection with the customer on it. And so if you don't know that, you'll be somehow confused at why they're giving you attitude about that. But if you've thought about it ahead of time, you can be like, well, I should have invited them. Is a good example.
Great takeaways, John. I'm still trying to convince my wife when I go on a 2-hour mountain bike ride, I'm working then too. So it's all about
I do. Yeah, I think of things when I was bike riding as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's that meditative time. You can actually solve it. What are you most interested in learning these days, and how do you make time for it? Obviously, you're super busy, and you got to be able to carve out something for yourself.
I'm trying to learn now that I'm heading up this team. One of the interesting things about product management is that often you're not a formal manager. You're not a formal, now I have a team now, and there's a lot to learn about specifics of management in a formal role. And so I'm spending some time doing that. What I find interesting is that a lot of the skills from being a product manager are kind of applicable because you build this awareness of groups of people and other people. But there are sort of skills around kind of formal management roles that I'm trying to spend some time thinking about. The other thing that I'm spending a lot of time focused on in my particular role is thinking about how these large organizations that are literally the best in the world at some things, like the best in the world at building cars or the best in the world at making furniture or anything like that, how they can be the best in the world at that. And then when it comes to digital products, they treat it like a project factory, like a feature factory. And I'm spending a lot of time trying to learn more about, organizational design and disruption and things like that to try to learn more about that specific problem because I find it fascinating. So those are two things that I've been thinking a lot about lately.
Yeah, I mean, that's a beautiful problem for the world to be having too, if you're an aspiring product manager.
Right. Exactly.
The truth, product is solving all these problems.
I think that one of the takeaways for if you're new to product management now is that, first of all, it's an amazing time to be doing this. And second, that, things are in a massive state of flux. And so the companies that you didn't think were really hiring PMs now are suddenly have job ads out for PMs. But you need to also anticipate that they haven't figured it all out yet. So it's a perfect time in your career to sort of grow into new product roles in companies, because a lot of companies are offering their first sort of formal structure of a VP of product or CPO instead of product managers. And it kind of, there's challenges and advantages. It's an advantage because it's a whole new company and a whole new space. And there's challenges because maybe that org isn't fully ready yet for like fully empowered teams, but it's a great time to be jumping in, so it's an awesome time to be doing this.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I guess kind of on that thread, is there anything that you intentionally keep doing yourself, even if it doesn't scale, now that you have a team?
I still personally, I still use Twitter a lot. I don't think that scales. I try to answer all sorts of questions. I spend Sunday mornings looking through DMs and answering people directly with product related questions. And I think it doesn't quote unquote scale, but I think it helps me stay in touch with kind of the community and what people are doing. And I think on our team, although in the last couple of weeks we haven't been great about it, but on the education team, we really try to make a point of getting out there and testing with real, again, I work at a company that deals with quantitative data and I'm a big fan of that, but there's nothing in my mind beats to if you have an opportunity to get a product out there and either do a moderated usability test or watch people and engage with people as they're engaging with your product. And a lot of companies, they're well, we don't really need to do that. That doesn't scale. And geez, that's a big mistake if you have the opportunity to do it. If you're a massive B2C company and with, billions of users, yeah, it can be hard to find a certain sets of customers. But if you have any opportunity to be in the same room or virtually in the same room with someone using your product, you should always take it.
Yeah, totally. Get it right from the source.
Yep.
John, what are some other tools that your product team uses as part of their product stack?
Well, wow. This is hard. We have a whole partner ecosystem, and now I'm always forgetting who I'm supposed to talk about or not. I'll just talk specifically about my team. We're big Miro users recently. Yeah. We're really incorporating that a lot into workshops and workshop design. We've been experimenting with Notion on our team, our small education team. It's a really good tool for keeping track of things. I know that our product team has been using Product Board. We use Amplitude a lot. We obviously use our product on our own product. It's actually funny when we have new employees because they go through the exact same thing that you and I spoke about. So we had someone on our content team or two people on our content team that it was great. They were putting new insights in the Slack channel. Look what I found. And I had to explain to them my lesson, which is if it looks good, it probably isn't good. Always share the Slack by all means with good news, but be ready for that to be wrong. And having a good product like Amplitude lets you figure out why it's wrong and what you were missing and things like that. So we do use our own product a lot, both on our product and for our content and stuff. So yeah, those are some tools that come to mind when I'm thinking about it. We also, I don't know if it's a tool as well, but we are really big fans of this North Star framework. I wrote this book about the North Star framework, this playbook, which you can sort of find on Google if you Google it. But I'm really passionate about that as a teaching tool because I think that it teaches a lot of important concepts of being more product led, or the idea of inputs and outputs, or leading or lagging indicators, that you're using metrics. And those are some skills that people often overlook or miss. So those are a couple of things, both like software tools and then I guess frameworks that have been helpful to us.
Last question for you, John, and then we'll move on to a handful of questions from our community here. What advice would you give to your younger self when you were trying to break into product management?
Well, now this is just the advice that I would have given myself, is don't be so impatient. I was really impatient all the time to like push the limit and, try new practices and do things. And so I think often I didn't slow down enough when the role, and like, if you're at the right company, you should be able to get like 2, 3, 4 years out of that company before maybe it becomes boring, or maybe it doesn't fit your career or something like that. And so I was doing shorter stints, like 12 months or something. And I could have probably been a bit more patient, or maybe been a little bit more thoughtful picking the particular companies to see, if that was an option there. The other advice, that's basically the main thing. I think one way to think of it is think of your career as a product. Think about that you have to design your career. And especially now, because the landscape of digital and these companies is changing so fast, like how product management will look in 10 years is not necessarily what it looks like now. And so if you take a long-term view of your career and kind of putting the pieces in place, it can be very advantageous, because right now there's so many jobs and there's so much like hustle that you run the risk of kind of bouncing between a couple companies for a while. And I think that if you play your cards right and think ahead, I think you can take a little bit more of a long-term view.
Very cool. Patience is always a great takeaway, especially when you're trying to put together a long and powerful career. So thank you, John. Well, we're going to open up just a couple questions here to our viewers. So please feel free to throw in the chat. I'm going to pick a couple of these out because we got a couple more of John's minutes here. I like this one. As a PM who has a fairly decent design chops but recognizes that they're not a designer, it's hard to convince an organization to hire a designer full-time to partner with PM.
Yeah.
Tips or advice on helping convince the org that a designer is needed? This comes from a LinkedIn user.
I'm going to keep these pretty short so we get through a bunch of questions, but you need to show, not tell. So I advise like advocating for maybe an outside designer to come in and facilitate either a design sprint or some opportunity for them to see like a real designer at work. And not like preparing mocks, because that's in their mind what they think a designer does, but try to set up a scenario where you can get either an outside speaker or maybe like a contractor to come in for 2 weeks to really show the organization what can happen when they're there. So that's the specific thing I would tell you to do.
I like that. It's easier to get a 2-week budget approved than a full-time hire.
Exactly.
So this is from Kevin Link on LinkedIn. If a PM's job is never done, how do you personally create successful cultures and healthy limits to prevent burnout, especially in current circumstances?
Ooh, that's a really, really good question. I think this goes to the idea of sort of what I call celebratable moments. And this is a big deal from a product. Often people say, well, how do you prioritize? And sometimes I'll say, well, I prioritize celebratable moments. And they go, what do you mean you prioritize celebratable moments? I'm like, look, we're never going to survive as a team if we don't hit moments that would make everyone on the team proud. And so what I do is, instead of thinking about a roadmap as a series of projects, I think of it as a series of celebratable moments that we're shooting for. And so I think that could address what the person's talking about. Like, don't think about shipping projects. Think about a map of celebratable moments or learning moments. Maybe learning that you failed is also helpful for you to do. But think in terms of, if this is what we do two months from now, and we're looking back on the last 2 months, would this be cause for a virtual, beverage or celebrate or something? And if the answer is yes, you've got like a celebratable moment. So I would shoot for that.
I like that. It's taking that pause and remembering that we're all on a journey. It's 2020. We're all locked up at home and we're moving faster than ever, but there's nothing wrong with just taking that pause. Seriously,
if it's 2021 and you're looking back on this year and you're like, oh, we shipped a lot of projects, you are not going to be happy with yourself. But if you look back and say, that was a really, really freaking hard year, And as a team, we grew and we had these things that we could really celebrate as a team. At least that would be some solace for what's been a very stressful year, I would say.
Awesome, John. Well, thank you so much for your time, John. Do you have any last minute takeaways or thoughts or anything you'd like to say about Amplitude as we wrap this up?
I mean, I think Amplitude's a great product. And if you're interested in Amplitude, you can check it out or check out the North Star book. That'd be good. I think most importantly, always feel free to reach out to me, on Twitter or LinkedIn. I like helping people one-to-one when possible. So feel free to do that. It takes me a while to sometimes get through all of them, but I'll try.
Very cool. Well, thank you, John. Your inbox is almost certainly going to be flooded after this.
Yeah, you know more than I do. So there we go.
Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Have an awesome rest of your day, and we'll see you soon here at Product.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Cody.
Take care. Thanks, John.
Great. Bye-bye.